Alright, so you can see that I am set up outside because we're doing plein air painting, which is painting while you are out in the location that you're going to paint, like you're painting out in the plein air. So plein air. If you do not have an easel at home, that is okay. You can just lay down your paper on any flat surface, as long as you are outside painting what you see. So first I like to take my pencil and kind of roughly draw out what I see out in front of me. It doesn't have to be super detailed, just try and get the size and placement of everything correct. So this part I wouldn't take super long on. You're just trying to get really basic details, so this should only take you a couple minutes. Really not a large chunk of your time. You're just trying to make sure you know where everything generally is going to go. I would recommend drawing pretty lightly, just because you don't want that pencil to show through when you're drawing. Alright, so what I kind of see out here are these two buildings, I've got a couple trees, and then there's that building that's further back, and then I can just barely see the top of that table in my view. So what I've got drawn here are the two buildings on either side, the smaller building farther back, and really lightly I've done those trees, not very detailed at all, and the top of that table. Okay? I'm going to use my tray down here to mix all my colors, and I like to start out with a wash of colors. So I'm going to go ahead and start out with my green. So I'm going to block out my green grass area. So you want a nice big puddle of paint ready to apply to your painting. So remember, you want a really nice light wash. You don't want it to be too strong or vibrant at the beginning, because you can add more layers later. So I'm going to start with a pretty watered down base, and I added a little bit of brown to that green just so it was a little more natural color rather than a super vibrant green. And don't worry if you paint over anything you drew, like I'm painting over where my tree is going right now, because you can always paint over it, and if it doesn't quite go away, you can erase your paint. We learned that in our last project. And I add a little more blue to my green to make it a little richer here. Remember, those things that are closer to us are usually more intense in color, a little bit darker, a little richer. So making sure that I'm looking at out at the landscape that I see, kind of looking for any big color changes or differences, but right now it's mostly pretty general, looking for just big blocks of color. Alright, next I'm going to try and get this general color of the buildings. So I'm going to go for like a really light, like kind of tannish yellow here. So we're just blocking out big areas of main color. So I want this to be really watery because I don't want it to be very strong in color. And keep in mind that once you paint over a pencil line, you won't really be able to erase it anymore. So if you have some really dark pencil lines that you know you don't want anymore, make sure you erase them before you start painting. When you're using that really watery paint, kind of be careful of any really big drips that come down. You want to catch those before they drip into the rest of your painting. I'm going to go ahead and make a more darker and intense brown for my table up front. Just because it's closer to me, so I know the color's already going to be more intense than those buildings that are farther away. Alright, and this is where it kind of comes into play, really paying attention to what you see, because I know that farther in the background there's that black top back there. So I would think about usually painting it just straight black, but because of how much light is reflecting on it, it's actually quite light. So I'm just going to do kind of like a light gray. And because it's further away, we don't see as much of that intense color. Alright, the last area of color I'm going to block out is the sky. If you want more of a kind of lighter sky, like currently for me right now, it's pretty light. It's almost like a white blue. You're going to add lots of water. If you want more of like a rich, true blue, depending on what day you're outside and how the sky is looking, I would add a little bit of violet to your blue, just because the paint in these palettes are a little bit, the color's slightly off. And this would be a good time to use that kind of two-color gradated wash that you could transition from one color to another if you would like to. Try not to paint on top of any sections that you've already painted, because remember, wet paint next to other wet paint is going to bleed into each other. So we've got our just basic blocked out colors. Try to get colors that are similar to what you see. Remember, things that are farther away from you are going to be lighter. Closer to you, it's going to be more intense and rich and dark. And then once this all dries, you can go on to adding more of those details. And notice how I haven't added in the trees yet, because that's going to go on top of what I've already painted, and I don't want any of those colors to bleed together. I want that tree to stand alone and be very crisp aside from the background that it sits in.